by a young man named Eric Mills. And Eric was at the time working in higher education on corporate training. And he was getting so many businesses that were coming in and saying, okay, we need help with our social media, but we don't know who to hire. We've tried the whole hire young thing, but that doesn't necessarily work for us because they may not have the business acumen. We've tried to hire your traditional marketer folk, but they may not have the tools and the skill set. So who do we go to? And so he went out looking for an organization that could assist in training and identifying or assessing individuals with the right skill sets. And there really wasn't anything out there. So what he did is he put together an advisory board of industry experts, completed a job study to gather data about what was really needed for the role of a social media strategist, and created an industry standardized certification. And that is what we do now. We offer a industry standardized certification and training.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's what's unfortunate is like my wife works for a small nonprofit that basically helps high school students graduate and go to college, and they really don't use social media at all well. And I keep trying to emphasize to her that basically their funding traditionally has come from a combination of corporate grants and money from relatively wealthy donors. Well, if you look at the demographics of the donors, they're all old white men and some women. So, but it's the ones they need to be sort of attracting at this time are millennials. That are best attracted through social media, and they're completely, I think, missing the boat on that. They have a lot of success stories that they could be using. They could be doing all sorts of things like that could really assist them in their mission and getting money and so on.
And there's different platforms.
Yeah.
We're on social media to a degree, but not the same as a lot of the graduating kids.
No.
Yep, understanding where the audience is, how to keep it fresh. For a nonprofit to compete with everyone else who wants money from donors, how do you stand out? Social is a great way to do that.
Yeah. So it's just, I keep trying to, I'm not, I'm 68 years old, so I'm not at the forefront, if you will, of social media by any stretch of the imagination. And I keep saying, you have, there's actually some people that, have gone through their program, have gone to college, have graduated. And I said, you really, need to get those people, not just, helping out, but get them on the board so that they can, provide the kind of strategic, help and direction that's needed to, make the kind of decisions about, okay, if we hire somebody, how should we budget money for this kind of thing? And so on. My wife basically writes the grants for the corporate donation, so she's not really involved in that part of it. The executive director is probably 10 years younger than I am. But they really need the people who know this stuff and know how, and not only know this stuff, but are willing to learn things from organizations like yours. It's not exactly rocket science, but I would say that what they need to do is be able to attract the millennials who could potentially serve to help with the funding, and B, keep in contact with their alumni so that they can continue to use their experience to help out with what they're doing with the kids who are still in school, and provide the success stories that they can.
Oh, absolutely.
But anyways, I'm just data governance, so.
No, you're doing great. I agree with you, and we actually do a lot of our continuing education focused on nonprofits because it is a little bit of a different beast, and they are usually a smaller kind of ragtag team. So how do
Yeah.
you get going with that? And there's also a lot of assumptions made in the social space that if you're not a certain age, then you don't understand it.
Yeah.
The pandemic has allowed my gray hair to shine through the color. And so I'm not the stereotype either. I'm in my 40s, which says I'm too old for this. But the reality, like you said, Ray, is it's not rocket science. If you understand business strategy, you can apply it to the tool.
Yeah.
But if you don't take the time to figure out that strategy and that tool, then you're kind of lost.
No, I mean, I think that the people we find in DAMA tend to skew a bit older. And I wouldn't say that the people I come in contact with are dinosaurs. I think, to do, social media effectively, though, is, it's a combination of the technical stuff plus knowing your audience. And so, somebody who is a millennial is going to know the audience better than me, for example. So, as somebody who is dealing with the kids have to, and still in school has to be close to what they are doing to have that understanding.
Mhm.
It's
I think that's interesting for nonprofits specifically
yeah,
is who has access and the keys to the social media accounts. In addition to being on the DAMA board, I'm on 3 or 4 others. And when you have a ragtag team, you try to spread the workload, especially if you don't have an executive director. That leads to some interesting dynamics when different people have different stylistics and filters for what is postable.
Oh, absolutely.
You know what I mean?
Yes, I do. That can happen in a company too. And if,
Yeah.
unfortunately, if
Yeah.
people are not super careful about what even platform they're logged into and as whom, you can also get personal things shared out on your
Unintentionally.
organization social.
But even intentionally, yeah. I mean, in a company, at least you have that vertical, even if it's a couple of people who are like, external communication. So kind of whatever. On the board, everybody's a generalist, and
Yep.
you could, something could be shared with you and you pass it on because, different filtering approaches. Yeah.
Absolutely. I've had my share of experience on board, so I totally understand.
Yeah. So I'm speaking from some interesting experiences that I was not expecting, but in retrospect, made complete sense why that would happen with those small group.
Mm-hmm.
Who's kicking off the meeting this morning?
I was about to say if I think we sort of almost delved into the introduction of the Institute, and but I don't know if Chantal, if you wanted to provide any additional context and a more thorough introduction before we formally dive in. We don't have a sponsor pitch to give at this meeting, so it will be just us going into our 2 presentations. Joining us for the second part around 10:45 or so will be Oda Gurevich from Marvelous AI, and then they have a platform that also innovates in the social media space and making sense of what data is out there. So Chantal, did you, if you're muted or not, let me see. If not, I think we've really kind of just already started to have the conversation. So if Jennifer, if you want to add anything else about, oh, I see Chantal's connecting to the audio. Hold on. Chantal, can you hear us? Otherwise, I think, Jennifer, if you want to add anything else about your, how you got into the space and what, how it's changed and how you got interested in this and anything else about yourself that you want to share, and then you can feel free to kick it off.
Sure.
Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, no, it's great to be here. I actually did not start out in social media. I spent the first 15 or so years of my career in sales and sales leadership, specifically in higher education. And about 2012, I found myself switching industries and trying to evaluate what I wanted to do when I grew up, kind of a thing. And I had these great experiences, and I wasn't sure where to bring them. And I had the pleasure of meeting Eric Mills, who I mentioned earlier was the founder of NISM. And he needed a little bit of help connecting the Institute with colleges and universities to add the program to their degrees. And I thought, well, I can do that for a little while I figure out, who I want to be. And it turns out that I, from there found my home. I got certified as a social media strategist in 2014. I don't like to totally pitch the wares of something I'm not willing to myself involve in and do, right? So I went ahead and got certified. I then got certified as an instructor because I love teaching, the teaching component. And that's something I learned in my first career. And I left the Institute actually for a while, started my own training company called Socially Inspired, where I was doing mostly social sales training, helping organizations harness the power of social media for their sales teams, putting two of my things together. And then I came back to the organization in 2016, took over as CEO and owner. So very proud now that we are a woman-owned organization. We have a great diverse board. We are in 6 countries across the globe and growing all the time. So. As for me personally, I live in Minnesota, so it's a little bit earlier for me this morning. The sun is slowly coming up here at 8:15. I have 2 teenagers that keep me busy. And other than that, we're getting close to a year of spending a life inside. We're used to that the 6 months of winter, but it's been a long.
You don't sound like you're from Minnesota.
I don't. Minnesota.
I worked with someone from there, and she would always say Minnesota.
Minnesota. Yeah, no, I've lived a lot of different places, but Minnesota is where I call home, and it's where I was born and grew up. So.
Are you from
Are you
Edina?
in Minneapolis?
I actually live south of the cities in a little town called Farmington. I know exactly where Edina is, though, for the person who asked about Edina.
Did you ever see Prince?
I did not ever see Prince. I have driven past Paisley Park a few times, though.
Did you ever go to Fargo?
I have been to Fargo many
too.
times, which is actually in North Dakota, but yes. Yeah, my family is actually closer to Fargo than Minneapolis. We're from kind of a small, well, actually, if you know what Minnesota looks like, on the western side, there's a little bump that comes out. My family's kind of smack dab in the middle of that little bump in a small farming community. And so we're much closer to Fargo than we are to the cities.
Wow.
Is where I grew up. So Fargo was somewhere we went often. So that's a little bit about me. Do you want me to jump into kind of a presentation of topic today, or?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, I love how kind of conversational this has been. So I really do hope we can keep that going, but I did put together a formal presentation, but Eugene or Chantel, I need you to allow me to share my screen if I'm going to do that. Some of the things that I wanted to chat about today are in the description, of course, but how and what kind of information is being collected by social. And I know some of this will be familiar to some of you and maybe new to others. And then we can talk a little bit about how do you protect yourself from misuse of the information that you have been sharing or may want to share. we'll talk about some of the good things actually that can come out of sharing as well. And then I'm open to conversation and questions throughout the whole thing. So if you guys do have something, don't feel like you can't interrupt me and ask questions either in the chat, which I may not see quite as quickly, or just unmute yourself and shout out at me. I'm okay with that. So quick question, and if anybody here knows how to, kind of raise your hand or just shout it out, that's fine. How many of you seen The Social Dilemma? Okay. So I have to admit, I haven't watched it myself, which for some people is shocking, because how can you work in social media and not have watched this documentary about how evil social media is? Well, for me, I didn't feel the need. I will watch it at some point, but there's been a lot going on in the world of social media that I've needed to handle anyways, that watching the evil that has been described out there in The Social Dilemma is not something that I was signing up to do right away. If you're interested, I would recommend that you go ahead and check it out. There are some folks within that documentary that talk about the back end, really, of social media and the things they wish they had not done in creating this, what they call a monster of social and data collection. But the reality is you have to listen to that with a grain of salt, as we do almost all media we consume these days, because those are folks who are no longer working in the industry. So there could be reasons for that, right? There could be some dissatisfaction with how things were left, whatever the case may be. But you also have to take in mind that the intentional goal when people created Facebook or Twitter or any social platform wasn't to go out and deceive the public. There were things that went into that, and there's humans that are playing a role. So we have to, kind of take our eyes and look wide at what's being shared with us. But there are some evils that have come out of social media, and it wasn't immediate. And one of those things that most people are really upset about right now is the collection of personal data. So I wanted to talk a little bit about that first. So how is data collected? Now, first of all, there are lots of different ways that people, data miners, regular individuals, marketing professionals, the bad guy, right, can collect data. One is through simple post analysis. There are tools out there that will kind of scrub or search data or keywords through the things that we post out on our social platforms. And they're looking for maybe positivity or negativity. So words that lend itself one way or the other. They're looking for people who are posting about a political affiliation or a location. So they can look for all kinds of different things within post analysis. This is also an area in which businesses can help provide resources, right? When we're looking out there and we're finding that our clients or our consumers are needing the answer to a specific question, or they can continually ask that question, we can then provide a response, right? So post analysis is one. Usually it's done through keyword search. So they're looking for something specific. They know what they're looking for. There are also tools out there that will do trend analysis. So they can say, right now, these things are trending. And if you're on Twitter at all, you see that when you log into your Twitter feed, because Twitter will actually tell you what things are trending right in the upper right-hand side if you're on your desktop. So that is all coming through post analysis and saying people are talking about this person, this topic. They're also collecting data through things that most people don't even see as being social media, the websites you visit, right? So I'm on my desktop right now. I logged into Zoom I logged into my email. I've got Facebook and LinkedIn up in the background. These websites are all tracking information. And now we have to actually have a disclaimer on our websites that tell people, right, that we're collecting data with our cookies and people can opt in or opt out. But all of that information is being collected and shared with people who want that information. I'm sure that most of you have had a situation where you Googled something or you looked it up on Amazon, and then you log into your Facebook account, and all of a sudden that product is being presented to you in your Facebook feed. And that is through the mining of data, right? Using the information about where you have visited and those types of things you might be interested in. Data is also being collected about what devices you're using and how you're using those devices. You can even have some information collected around how you hold your device or where on the screen you actually touch in order to make the actions happen. I use an email client called MailChimp. And when I do that, I have a very simple example of this, which is instead of just telling me how many people have clicked the links that I have put into the email, I can actually see where in the document the link was that they clicked the most frequently. Well, this can help me understand, right, what people are reading or how far they're reading, but it's also showing me a little bit about the device and whether or not I have made my content easily accessible for someone who might be on a mobile device, okay? Some platforms and some data collection will even say, you know, who's your host? If you're on a mobile device, are you on AT&T, Sprint, Verizon? What are you using? They watch all of that. Data is collected a lot in part by what we give them, okay? When we sign up for a new app or a social media site, we have to give them certain information. Usually it's our name, possibly it's our date of birth so that we're, you know, quote unquote, old enough to be there. It might be our location or our mailing address, but we're giving that information away and they are collecting and storing that demographic information. Data is collected every time you ask Google a question, Google, Bing, whatever search browser you use, Edge. Every time you type in, you know, what is, insert query here, they are tracking that and trying to provide you with the right answers, right? And that's how you get predictive asking too. So if you haven't noticed this before, you'll start to see it now. But when you go into Google and you start to type, you know, what is the most popular, it's going to start to autofill. Is it going to say social media, toy for kids? They're going to help you say, what are you looking for, right? So all of those questions being asked are being collected. Data is being collected when you have your location settings turned on any of your devices. They want to know if you're moving or not. I'm not sure if you guys had this happen in your areas, but I know here in Minnesota, early on in the pandemic, our governor said, it looks like Minnesota has done a great job of staying at home when they first put the first stay-at-home order together. Well, how did he know that, right? Was he out driving the streets to see who was staying at home and who wasn't? No, of course not. They were tracking location data that was turned on our phone, the GPS trackers. Data is collected when we share events that we're attending. We check into something, or we use an event app that has a specific event location or description. Data is collected when we reference life activities. A couple years ago, there was a study done that said that Facebook can actually predict when someone is going to get engaged because we have kind of a pattern, if you will, as humans, to how we share life activities out on social media, and then they can predict that the next activity might be an engagement. But these are things that we are giving, right, social media, and they are tracking and collecting all of that data that we are adding to our platform. Even in Facebook, for example, you have the option to add who your relatives are and say, is it your sister, your brother, your cousin, your mom? You have the opportunity to say where you were born, where you went to high school, where you went to college. All of these activities give people data about who we are, how old we are, what we do every day or on the weekends, right? These are things that they're collecting. Can anybody think of other means for data being collected within the digital space?
Did you mention like audio?
It didn't mention audio yet, but that's very true. Your Alexa or your Echo Dot or all of that, they are collecting that as well. There is,
Oh, Fitbits too, yeah.
oh yes, Fitbits, absolutely. All of our health trackers, they collect data. And depending on which one you have, it's more than just the steps you walk, it's your heart rate. It's your sleep patterns, right? As far as
Internet of Things.
yes, absolutely, the Internet of Things.
Your likes, any, what your interests are and what pages you've liked.
Yes, absolutely. What pages have you liked? What books have you claimed that you've read? All of this data gives people really good insight, right, into who we are.
And what you've purchased on Amazon, right?
Of course, what you've purchased on Amazon. And I know we're not talking too much about this side, but people get really nervous about the data that's collected via social. And I actually have to say personally, I'm more nervous about the data that's on my credit card, right? Because if you think about it, the strip on the back of your credit card holds all of your information. How much of something did you purchase? What brand did you purchase? What day and time? Where did you purchase it from, right? Like there's a lot of data on there. And I never realized it until, I would say probably about 12 years ago when my kids were small. I got my first phone call from Target that said, we understand that you've purchased, this baby item, which is now on recall. And I thought to myself, how do they know that I purchased that? Well, of course I used a Target credit card. That's how they knew.
How about what TV shows you watch or what you're watching on cable or?
Absolutely. And there's always been Nielsen, which has tried to collect data about what we've watched on television, but the digital world in which we live in now and how we stream things has become a lot easier to track that. It's also, when you think about it in a social context, there's recommendations that people can ask on social and say, hey, what should I watch next, right, on my next Netflix? Well, if they're watching Netflix or Hulu or those kinds of keywords, they can see what shows are trending or are popular being recommended. I see some great ones coming up in chat, video, of course. Even just in that image, you can scan not only the person and what they're talking about, but their background, where they might be located, what time of day it is, facial recognition, absolutely. Even if you don't want to be on digital, chances are there are security cameras on the street in which you walk that has the capability of doing facial recognition. Easy pass, gait analysis, people who you're associated with, absolutely. One of the things I've seen on Facebook lately is it's a silly little game that says, if you were stranded on a desert island, who would you take with you? And you're supposed to tag people, right? Like this person would be there, but they wouldn't have brought anything. This person would have brought the food, and you're supposed to tag all these people. Well, that's an easy way to tell the world, these are people I know. This is what I think of them, right? They're disorganized, or they're a planner, or they're the foodie, or whatever. And we're giving a lot of information out. So great idea, guys. This is fantastic. Thank you. There's lots of different ways. Yeah.
I had a question. Maybe you'll cover this later, but it was on my mind, so I thought I'd shout it out now.
Yep.
Like, what's your take on like, okay, yeah, these there's a lot of data being collected, but for like almost anything you sign up for or, set up, you're usually clicking through some, whether you read it or not, I kind of think is on you, but you are agreeing, like you have to click on agree. You can change settings in some cases. So like, could you speak to that at some point on like kind of your take on that? Like, well, yeah, they're collecting this, but you've agreed to do that. And that's how they're making a lot of these things free and you don't have to use them. Cause that comes up a lot. And I know at least in my organization, we're always saying like, when we're doing things for work, of course. But I believe it's important even in your personal life, like don't sign something unless you've read it, or at least acknowledge that then if you haven't read it, then you probably are giving away a lot more maybe than you anticipate. But
Yes.
could you speak to that at some point?
You bet that I will. Absolutely. It's in the in the presentation, so I promise I will get there. That is a great topic and definitely one that we should talk through. So one of the things I wanted to share here is a couple of insights into the type of data that can be collected in social. So this one is a screenshot from Facebook. This is from a Facebook business page. So not everyone will see this on their individual page, but I wanted to just kind of give you an idea about just how businesses can see the demographic information. Now there are 3 tabs across the top. One is your fans. That's where I am on right now. So this page is identified fans. So they've said they follow or they like this page. It breaks it down by gender, by age, by country, by city, and by language they speak, right? So as a business, this information is extremely helpful, right? Because I can go ahead and make sure that I tailor the language that I use to the audience that I have here. If they're 25 to 44, I'm going to catch the majority of my audience. If I speak in language that females are more likely to relate to or understand or empathize with, then that's important. It makes complete sense to me that the main country is the United States and our main city is Minneapolis because that's where we are based, right? But I should be cognizant or aware of where we're showing up that is outside of those geographic areas, right? So Suriname, South America, is the 3rd highest country for our fans. Well, if that's the case, then I should make sure that we are communicating properly with that audience and their needs, right? And what they have happening there. It also makes sense to me that Dutch is coming up fairly high because Suriname is a Dutch speaking country. So this information can be helpful, but this is the kind of information that businesses can see just by the fans and followers. Now they can also see information by people who are engaging in their posts or who have responded to things. This is just kind of a high level for you to get a start. Another thing that businesses can see is when your fans are online, right? So I can see the time of day that the majority of people who have identified themselves here again as fans are on Facebook specifically, and what day of the week most of them are on. Facebook for me and almost all of the businesses that I've seen analytics for is actually fairly similar across the day of the week. We don't tend to take a day off when it comes to Facebook. We're there every day. It is not the case necessarily with other platforms. And this one you guys might have seen. This is some sample data out of Google Analytics. This is not what I would consider social media, but it is digital information. And I wanted to show this because I referenced it earlier. The browsers that you might be using, whether you're using Chrome, Safari, Edge, Firefox, we can see that in the back end of our Google Analytics and how you're accessing business pages. And we can see outside of browser, we can also see the mobile device you might be using, who that mobile carrier is. I mean, there's a lot of information that's being collected everywhere you go, whether it be social or simply online. But as I referenced earlier, it's also happening when you physically go somewhere, right? Even if you left all your technology at home, if you still have a credit card or a driver's license, I don't know what your driver's license looks like, but mine has a strip on the back, just like a credit card does, that has all of my important information on it. And that's what they use, you know, when they take your driver's license to scan it and see if you have any outstanding warrants or whatever, right? That has all kinds of information. So regardless of where we go, we carry information with us and we create a footprint, whether it be digital or in person. So the real question comes up, what is actually private information? A lot of people over the last year, but also before that, scream that company has my private information, or Facebook has sold my private information. But what really is private information? The first few we think about are probably social security numbers, banking details, and health records, right? These are things that are supposed to be really hard to obtain. We sign forms, right? When our children turn 18, we can't hear about how they're physically doing or help them doctor even when they're in college, because now they're 18, they're an adult, and all that's locked down unless the right forms are filled out, right? A second group that a lot of people think are private are things like property records. Do you own a home? How much did you pay for your house? What is your address? When did you get married? And who did you get married to? What was your maiden name? In court cases, have you ever been to court? Did you get divorced or file for adoption or anything like that? And the reality is this second group is actually not at all private information. This is what they consider public information and is data mined all the time already and was for years. It's all on file at the courthouse. You can go and see who owns your neighbor's house, when it was purchased, and how much it was purchased for, how many acres of property it might be. All of that information is out there. Is our browsing history and online purchases actually private information? And this goes a little bit to the question that was asked. And the reality is no, we have signed information, signed documents, or clicked accept that says that people can track these things for us. And so our browsing history, our online purchases, the information that we freely share online is not private information because we have let it be public information. And I know a lot of people argue with me on this because they say, well, I shared that with my friends. Facebook can't use that information. Do you own Facebook? Because you don't get to set up the terms of use if it's not yours, right? It's somebody else's platform that you're using. And so you have to understand the rules of engagement.
Somebody once told me that, and this is kind of a rule of thumb that I use with this sort of stuff. If you're online and you're using something for free, you're the product.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yep, absolutely. And actually they talk about that in the Social Dilemma a lot. I've read several of the write-ups, but they talk about that. Is that if you're using it, you're the product. Absolutely. You're not buying a product online, you are the product. Okay, so how do we protect ourselves from this scary world? One is understanding, right? Understanding that we have given consent. Most of the information that's being collected online, whether it be on a social media platform or via the websites that we visit, we've done it with consent. Honestly and truly, how many of you have read all of the terms and conditions to every site or every application you've ever downloaded in your phone or on your iPad or, technology? I can honestly tell you I have not, right? Sometimes I skim them. And if it's something that I am apprehensive of because I know little about, then I will read them. But if you actually read the terms and conditions, you'll find that none of the information you put out on some of these platforms is yours. Facebook or Twitter or Snapchat can do whatever they want with the information that you put on there. Now, typically they don't take your information and broadcast it on television, right? But it becomes their information. The same goes in what some people think of as an old platform, and that's blogging. There are a lot of blogging platforms out there where it isn't yours, right? It is owned by whatever platform you're using to put that information, that intellectual property out to the world. An easier kind of piece is privacy settings. Do you even know which ones are turned on your phone? It's shocking to me how many people may not realize that when you take a picture with your camera on your phone, there is a ton of information that is stored in that picture. The time of day, your geographic location, so it's tracking GPS for where you are. Perhaps the things that are easily identifiable within that picture, but easily things that are like your location and the time of day. You can turn that off so that your camera isn't collecting that information when it takes a picture. But if we don't turn that off and we take a picture and then we go share that information on Facebook, and then we say, how did someone break into my house when I was on vacation? Because you shared a picture that said your geographic location was outside of the US, but a month earlier, you shared a picture of your home with the address embedded in the picture. And so they knew you weren't there. You made it easy, right? So there are a lot of ways that we can go through and just set our privacy settings up so that we are limiting the types of things that are being collected or at least shared with a wide variety of people. But to the point that was brought up earlier, we are giving consent to this. And most of the time, we are the one giving away our own information. I'm going to come back to that in a second here. Oops. There we go. So how are some things, or what are some things that we can do to protect ourselves? Well, first, let's be mindful about what we share. If I'm going to share about my vacation, I'm not going to share it when I'm on vacation. I'm going to share it when I get home, right? And the language that I will use will be very clear that I have returned, right? And that I am home. A lot of people also encourage folks to think twice about sharing pictures of your children, especially when they are too young to give you consent, because you are creating a digital footprint for them before they have a say in what that is. You can protect yourself by reading the terms and conditions. Spend some time to really understand what the application collects, how it's going to use that information, whether or not they routinely use third parties. What is that? What are you signing? Immediately go in and check your privacy and security settings. Right now, it's strongly encouraged that you use two-factor authentication. It's a pain in the butt, right? You want to be able to just log in or be logged into something. But it's encouraged now that if you log in, you actually also get a text message to your phone with a separate code. So you're logging in and it's authenticating that you are who you say you are. It's more important, I would say, for businesses to do that. But if you have been or are worried about being a target for scams or for misinformation, then you may want to think about that as well. Keep things like your location, your address, your phone numbers, emails, your birth date, and other information that you would deem private to your close friends only, or turn it off completely. And I know most of us love the birthday greetings on Facebook, and frankly, mine is there. You can see what my birthday is, right? But I've made a conscious choice to do that. People often get upset because they're like, how does everybody know when my birthday is? Well, because you gave it that information and told Facebook or Twitter or whatever platform you're on that they can share that with the world. Use strong passwords. I actually use an application to help me house my passwords, because now passwords are getting ridiculous as far as, they need to be 15 characters and upper and lower case and numbers and special characters, and nothing can be repeated twice. And I can't keep up with all the platforms that I am on. So I have researched and use a third-party service to help me hold my passwords together. But the important thing is to use a strong password. The most common password today still is password 123. Seriously? Like, I thought we were beyond that, but we're not. So think of something that is unique to you and somewhat identifiable for you, but that other people may not know, right? One of the most frustrating things for me is this one: the games, the third-party apps, and the potential phishing tactics that people aren't recognizing. I feel like I'm picking a lot on Facebook right now, but it's the one platform that we all utilize the most. And because it is more of a personal and friends network, we tend to share things that we would not have thought to share on some of the other platforms, right? But there's a lot of games that are on there, or, let's get to know each other. And a lot of those get to know each other things ask you things like, where did you have your first date? When did you have your first date? Who was your first boyfriend? What was the first make and model of your car? Do any of these sound like security questions that you often get asked when you're setting up an account? Because they look like it to me. I see those games come through, and I think to myself, oh my gosh, if I answered this, you would all have my security questions: my mother's maiden name, right? My first boyfriend, my first pet's name, all these things. They weren't intended by that first person necessarily to collect your password information or your security questions, but that is so easily used for that purpose. So be mindful about which of those you want to actually participate in. There's also a ton of third-party applications that are on platforms, and they have their own terms of use or terms of service. And so you need to understand what those are. And if it takes you off of LinkedIn or off of Facebook, then those apps are also going to be collecting and possibly sharing your data. And then there's a lot of techniques where people are trying to gather additional information. I don't quite understand it, but it happens all the time when somebody sends me a second friend request. I'm like, we're already friends. But so many of us blindly just accept, oh, I know that person. And we don't think, wait a minute, but we're already connected. So this second person is probably fake, right? And we need to be thinking through that piece. Also, you need to do some of your own research. You shouldn't be a part of the problem, right? And this is going to move us into some fake news conversation a little bit, but I did want to just bring this up. When you put certain information into the computer, others will get certain information out, right? So watch what information you give out. Games with important dates, your mother's maiden name, anything that's used for security questions. This is a picture in the bottom that says, what kind of old lady will you be? This is one of the examples of those quiz questions or those third-party apps that people are answering all the time. What kind of old lady will you be? What kind of inscription will be on your headstone, or astrology type stuff that, people are, oh, I'm so interested in my horoscope. You're going somewhere else for that information. And Facebook no longer controls the terms and conditions of that. Now it's whatever app is using that, okay? Garbage in is garbage out. And that's the lead into a conversation about fake news. And also a reminder that what we put in is what people will get out, right? So how do we spot, before we move too far into that, does anybody have any other questions about what information to hold on to and how to be mindful of what you share?
Jen, I wanted to ask you about passwords. I remember my brother and one of my friends telling me they got this this email that they could see your password, and I don't know if I ever got it because there's so many emails in my Google and my Gmail account that I don't go through them all. Is it possible for someone to get your password just logging on to an account like let's just say Walmart or Target or Amazon for that matter?
So I don't understand 100% the context, like who sent the email. But I can tell you that typically the answer to that is no. The average person can't just log into something and oops, there's your password. I am dealing with an estate right now, and my father passed very suddenly, and we don't have any passwords for him. He was single. And so we don't have access to his phone. We don't have access to his email, any of that kind of stuff. And the companies themselves, so Apple, AT&T, they don't have passwords. So it's not, passwords are typically not stored in that way. It surprised me a little, I'll be very honest, because I thought, well, somebody somehow has the password, otherwise they wouldn't know how or who is logging in. But there's some sort of encryption happening or some sort of wall that's been put up between that and the password. So if Joe is logging in, he shouldn't be able to see what your password is. And frankly, the cashier at Walmart or the web guy at Walmart shouldn't see what your password is either. There might be other situations, but typically that is what I would guess is some sort of a phishing expedition.
Okay.
We know your password. We saw it here. You need to go in and change it, because now you're going through a website that is not the right one, and they are collecting that information.
Yeah, phishing is what I was going to, a lot of times it's just 1 or 2 letters off. The website looks the same. They scrape the logo and they create a domain based email addresses off of that website. So they're contacting you, appearing to be legitimate, taking you to a website that appears to be legitimate. And it's at that point that it's more likely to be captured. I think we store passwords as a hash. So we can't get it back to you, but we can tell you if you gave us the right one.
Right. Yep. And that's the same thing I'm dealing with my dad's estate stuff.
The one exception is, your browser. So Google Chrome does store passwords, and they can be revealed locally only on your machine if you have the Chrome passphrase.
Oh, that might be something I have to look into. Unfortunately,
Chrome passphrase can transcend devices. For example, if you have 2 computers or a mobile phone, but that is meant to be a local place where all of your saved, stored passwords exist. That's the only place I think. Unless it was a true data breach attack, and then your password did get taken unencrypted, in which case it's everybody's got it.
Absolutely.
I thought the whole story was strange because they were both telling me that, and both my friend and my brother, and I'm like, how is that possible? I was like, how is that possible? They could have gotten your password unless you did something, to compromise it.
Well, it's interesting because these hackers or folks that are trying to get our information, they've gotten kind of smart, right? They use words, they use IP addresses or website addresses that look very close. They use high tech, images that really make the logo look like it's real. There's so much happening here. My grandmother, she's 93, and she had her information stolen because they called and they knew her age, or approximate age anyways. So they were able to make an assumption that she receives Social Security. And they said around the time of the first stimulus check, they called and they said, if you receive your Social Security via electronic payment, we're concerned that perhaps your stimulus check may not get there. So can you verify for us your bank number? To which, of course, she was like, well, they know so much about me already. No, they made assumptions about you. because of what they did know. So we have to be very careful. I mean, Microsoft calls me all the time. They want me to go to my computer and check something to make sure it's working properly and enter in an email address, or I mean a website address. I'm like, no. I oftentimes lie and say I'm an Apple household and just move on. But yeah, I mean, Microsoft calls me all the time. Google calls me all the time. No, those places are not calling you, right? The IRS is not going to send an automated message and tell you that you're going to be arrested. Okay, they're going to send you certified mail if you are going to be audited, right? There's different ways in which people are interacting with you. So we have to be very careful of that information. And part of it goes into this spotting of fake news or phishing scams. Where's it coming from, right? Take a very close look at the source. And some of you may giggle at this, but some of you may have to stop and just think about this for a second. Even in your friends and family, you have to stop a moment and look at the source. Do you actually believe they read the article that they're sharing with you? Or are they sharing with you a sensational headline that they want to be true, right? Or that they are so surprised about that they think it only has to be true, right? So look at that source and make sure it's coming from something that you trust. Make sure you watch spelling. I don't know if y'all saw this, but it's been about 7 years ago now. A big article came out that Betty White dies in her LA home, DYES. Okay. So Facebook blew up with rest in peace, Betty White, and all of these fantastic memorials to how amazing she is. If you actually clicked on the link and read the news article, it was about how she has been dyeing her hair white for 40 plus years. So we have to, do a little bit of our due diligence and look through the information. If it's giving you a website address, does that website address look right? And sometimes even before you click on something, you can tell if it doesn't look quite right. Now, this one is tough when they've used like a link shortener, which a lot of us will use so that you're not getting a web address that's 14 miles long. But you can still kind of see if there's something common about it or something that looks off. So just kind of take a look and see if that web address looks right. That goes back to the question that you had, Denny, about whether or not they have the password. Was it really walmart.com or was it walmart.co? Or something a little bit subtle and a little bit off. With fake news, it's really hard sometimes because we want to believe certain things, right? But does the headline sound just too good to be true, or is it too bad to be true, right? Is it just so off the wall that you can't quite understand why that's making news on Twitter first, right? Whoops, sorry, my image came up too early. There are ways that we can also check, okay? Snoops.com is a very common fact checker. Google has a fact checking tool. When I put some recent news in the Google fact checking tool, it actually went to Snoops. So Monday of this week, I think it was Monday, I heard on Twitter that the Pope was arrested, right? And the FBI was going to investigate. Well, first of all, I don't know why the FBI is investigating anything that's happening in Vatican City. But people were sharing on Twitter and a couple on Facebook that the Pope was arrested. Well, there's a lot of things that we may not know, but when we start to fact check, right, we can find out that certain things are false. And if you actually go into the Snoops and you read about it, it will say where the story originated, who the originating author was or organization is that put that out, and why it isn't true, right? Or is true if the facts were correct. We just got off an election, well, I'm hoping we're off of it, but a lot of times we are really nervous about what our politicians are saying, what's true, right? So there are some that are more political focused, PolitiFact, factcheck.org, All Sides. These are just a few different places that we can go to check the news that we're getting. I would encourage folks, if you don't think it looks right, don't share it. If you want to share it, then check at least 2 different fact-checking tools before you go ahead and move forward with that. All right. Any questions on fake news? What's your favorite?
I had a quick question.
Oh, go ahead,
For-
Carrie.
Oh, it was more around when kids sign up for things and they put their accurate age in, right? So of course it's easy to bypass if you just answer the age question correctly, but like assuming someone puts in their correct age, like do you see any distinction in what they're getting?
Sorry, you cut out just a little bit. But so if people are using their exact age, typically no, there isn't a
or how they're handled, or is it pretty much all the same? Because I would throw in like the gaming that also seems to the news. I was just curious.
No, that's a great question. Sorry, you were cutting in just a little bit, so I apologize for that. Typically, the age doesn't necessarily affect what they're served up, what kind of information they're served up. They can still see things that people share. If their friends or family are sharing information, they're going to still see that, whether it has a bad word in it or not. What the age typically does is helps people understand the demographic of who's on the platform, but also it might serve up ads differently. So the promoted posts and the advertisements that you see on something like Facebook or Twitter, that usually has a piece where it says, only show it to this age group. So instead of showing it to a 13-year-old who probably doesn't have a credit card, they're going to show it to the mom of a 13-year-old, right? And so it can be used that way, but it usually is not about filtering things out for them. There are some social tools like YouTube for Kids that when you sign up to that tool instead of the full YouTube, it does filter out the things that are no longer age appropriate. But for typical platforms like Twitter, Snapchat, TikTok, no, the age isn't filtering things out for you. One of my favorite conversations to have with my children, who are, as I mentioned earlier, teenagers, and they're on Instagram, is that not every image you see is 100% accurate as well. And so that can be a little bit harder to decipher, what is a true image and what isn't. My kind of my standard boilerplate for the kids is just because it looks true doesn't mean it is true, right? Last week, when we had the attacks on the government, there were some pictures that were released, but after doing some research, they found that some of those pictures were from 5 years ago of a different march or rally that was in that same area. And so we need to kind of be mindful that even the pictures and the videos may not have the true date stamp on it that we think it does. And truthfully, photo editing has become pretty easy and really hard to detect. So we just need to put on a lens of scrutiny, frankly, and make sure we're looking at things with, not only our eyes and what we want to believe, but what we think is actually truly happening, and do some discernment of that information. One of the things that I always kind of giggle at is during hurricane season, if a hurricane does kind of come aboard the seaboard here, almost always a picture of a car or from a car window where the road is flooded and a shark is swimming by comes out. Well, this shark has been swimming by that same car every year for the last 7-8 years, every time there's a hurricane. It's not real, right? Like the picture in the car might be, but it's not in this, the shark is not in this picture. And George, you're completely correct in the comments. If it can be faked in a movie, it can be faked in a video, it can be faked in a picture, absolutely. So we need to be very mindful of not everything we see is correct. All right, so we've talked about a lot of the bad stuff, but I do want to talk a little bit about how the data collection can be good. And I look forward to some of your guys' input on this too. The idea is that it streamlines our search process. So we talked early on about every time you ask Google a question or your browser a question, it might autofill for you. It's predictive. This can help streamline what it is you're looking for. If you're not 100% sure what terminology to use, as long as you get started, the system helps you along the way, right? So it kind of makes things a little bit easier for you. I know I personally have benefited from having potential products or services served up to me based on what it is that I need. When my father passed in August, we also inherited a dog. We did not have a dog prior to that. And so I had no idea where to start and what to do with this dog, right? But all of a sudden I was getting information served up to me about things that might be helpful for this dog. Good dog beds or dog treats or good harnesses, whatever the case may be. And so it has been helpful for me that social media watched the fact that all of a sudden I had pictures with a dog, and now it's serving up products and services that might be appropriate to that dog, right? Data can also be impactful into future development, right? If we have companies out there always looking for how we can better improve how we do our jobs, how we live our life, how we drive our cars, whatever the case may be, the data that people are collecting today can be used to help that development along and really kind of educate us on what it is that we really need to move forward. There's definitely a convenience piece in here. If you have your GPS location set on, you might get a notification that says, you know, Culver's or In-N-Out Burger has a sale today, and you're 5 minutes from one, and it's lunchtime, right? So you're like, yes, that's what I want to eat. So it's serving up some of that convenience. It's being used in research all the time. We talked about the Fitbits and the health trackers, right? This is helping our medical professionals understand how we live our lives. What kind of exercise are we getting? How often are we getting it? What is our heart rate doing? Are there things that we can be predictive of to assist in us living a more healthy or happier life? Artificial intelligence, it's all around us. I know in many ways it makes me nervous, but in a lot of ways it's helping us live our lives, right? A little bit more comfortably than maybe we did 20 years ago. How many of us are watching a streaming service like Netflix or Amazon Prime, and they serve up to you a suggestion of what to watch next? They're doing that based on the data they're collecting. You know, if somebody watches The Queen's Gambit, they know that after that, they tend to watch this or that, or they like these other genres. So it's giving us information to build, okay? We covered a lot, and I might even be a little bit early in being done. So I want to open up some questions that anyone has around data collection, privacy, fake news, really anything we've talked about today that I can be of assistance with.
This is Rich Brooks. Could you just comment a little bit? You might not be able to speak in detail, but can you just comment about what your thoughts are around data collection and how basically we are all providing a service to these organizations to feed their artificial intelligence algorithms, and how bias kicks into that. Because, you know, you have YouTube, and YouTube will kind of show you additional videos, not necessarily because they're of interest, because they're trending. And then people will click on that, and then, you know, video might not be what you think, and that introduces a bias, and the bias proliferates. Then they feed that to their artificial intelligence to come up with these things you were talking about, like convenience and, you know, inference to things based off of what people are doing. Can you just comment about your thoughts a little bit about that? And, you know,
Totally.
is it good or is it dangerous? Is it both?
Yeah. So I think that is fantastic. You've got several different parts in there. I want to try to kind of unpack. Absolutely, we are helping these companies. There's a reason that Google gives you analytics to the depth that they do for free if you have a website, is because if you're using Google Analytics, they're collecting that data as well, right? And so it is a massively powerful tool, and they give it away to businesses at no charge. And that is because we are fueling their data mine, right? And yes, they use that information for all kinds of purposes. I did mention earlier, you know, garbage in, garbage out. There are some people who have said to me, I like to be obnoxious. And when I'm on Google or Facebook or YouTube or whatever, I'll just click the ads, because I know if I click the ad, the company is getting charged for it. And it makes me feel better that they're charging, or I'm charging them for my time. And I think, well, that's kind of silly, because you have to watch a certain length of the ad usually in order for it to actually charge you. But if you click it, you're going to get more of that same thing, right? Because now you're giving it information that you're interested in that, and you're moving forward. So yes, there is some concern around the validity or the authenticity of the information. Are people doing it because they really are interested in that information, or are they doing it to be, you know, spiteful or whatever? I also know that there's a lot of information that is incorrect. The question that Carrie asked about kids, you're supposed to be 13 in order to join some of the social media platforms. And so if you put in an age that is less than 13, they don't let you join. So I know that there are parents who have created accounts for their kids, or said their kids can create accounts, and the birthdays are false. So that person looks like they're 45 when they're 12, right? So all of that does have its negative consequence. The assumption still reigns that for the most part, the data we get in digital is more authentic of who we are and how we work than the data we might get if we're stopped by a researcher in a mall asking survey questions. Because if we're getting asked survey questions by another human, we may feel as though the answers we give are being judged, right, by that human. And in the digital landscape, there is this thought that the research that's being collected is more authentic. So I think you're seeing a combination of both, right? The authentic and the inauthentic. There's always going to be, I believe, garbage data, right? Because we will put that in. I think somebody mentioned it earlier in the comments that they fake it, right? Who was that? When they put in personal information, sometimes they lie about what that information is. We have to account for some of that outlier and not take every piece of data as gold, but instead look at the larger trends and go from there. Does that help?
It does. It just seems that there's a lot of, you know, there's a lot of opportunity for incorrect information. You pointed out, and the thing that I always think about is this information is taken and it's fed into artificial intelligence systems, which then produce these models, and they produce this output. But, you know, you can't do this, but how much do people look at data and say, you know, I do this in my job, does that look right? Does it not look right? Should you flag it? Because if you just take it on, you just give it to the engine and it starts making inferences, it could be working on bad information, and then you produce an algorithm that, you know, is used for something important. And the whole logic of the algorithm is based on somewhat sketchy information.
Oh, absolutely.
It's more, how does it proliferate, and then how does it change our lives once the artificial intelligence has been built? And now that's loose.
Now, I hope strongly that people are taking the time to hire people to have some problem solving skills, right? And do some discernment of the information. One of the things that we teach when we talk about research and analysis for social media specifically is about context. So, for example, on some of those slides that I showed earlier, let me go back to it, actually. I think it'll be easiest. So let's go back to the Facebook. So India is showing up as our second highest country with fans, right? I happen to know that there is not an NISM certified professional in the country of India. I also happen to know that there is another company in India that goes by the acronym NISM, the National Indian Securities Market, which also has a certification. I know these things because one, I've looked it up. Two, I've gotten messages through our website of students who are trying to register for their exam, and I have no recollection of who they are. And I ask right away, like, what exam are you trying to take? And I have found out. So we have to take a look at the context of our data and say, is that actual data? Like, it's the second highest country, supposedly, for my fans, but I know I don't have a huge audience there. Yes, I do have a couple of brand advocates over there, but not enough for me to tailor my message to the Indian population, because we don't have a market there. Most of those people think we are the securities market. And so we have to look at not just one piece of data, but several pieces of data and understand the context of that data. And my hope is that colleges and universities, certifying or education institutions like mine and others, are actually spending time teaching people how to sort through the data and identify potential outliers or potential red flags, so that we're not just taking things and saying, okay, this is what we know from this one source at this one point in time, let's build something on it. Hopefully they're taking looks at several different data collection tools, timeframes, and building their AI around that.
That was great. Thank you.
You're welcome. Carrie has a question in the chat about what I see for the future. Do I expect increased regulations and things of that nature? Yes, I do, absolutely. In the US right now, we don't have a ton of regulation around data collection and the use of that data. Let's go with something as simple as an email address and what is used with that email. There are, yes, anti-spam laws and things of that nature, but the US has not been super quick at jumping up and putting regulation in there. Mostly, I think, because there is still some conflict around, what do we do to not get into a situation where these big brands are censoring people or creating a home for lack of free speech, which are things that people here are really worried about. Last year, I think it was last year, the European Union came out with GDPR, which is a regulation for them around email marketing that affects people all over across the country. So if businesses here in the US are doing business with folks in Europe, there is regulations about how and when they can email them and what they can do with that data. I do see increased regulation coming, but I personally yet don't have a good handle on what that's going to be. We were joking or talking seriously, but kind of tongue in cheek earlier about the fact that certain Twitter accounts have been shut down in the last few days. There's a lot of people that are nervous about that, about the fact that a social media platform which is supposed to be a conduit for people to express their thoughts and beliefs, is being censored by the owners of those organizations, and whether or not that's legitimate. Now, some of us perhaps breathe a sigh of relief because we no longer want to hear that person's opinion. But there is a bigger question to be asked around whether or not we should be shutting down accounts for certain things. And who is that? Who is the decision maker? And what are the criteria for actually stopping someone from speaking, right? At what point do we say the person on the corner sharing their predictions about the future should no longer be allowed on the corner, right? And that's kind of what we're getting at here. So I do think there'll be increased regulation. There has already been some changes made to data on things like Facebook that's being shared with businesses in certain sectors. I also was looking just recently, Twitter used to have a lot more analytics data and it has disappeared. Like there's a lot of data, it's not showing the average business user. Now they're still collecting that data. And I'm assuming if I paid for it, I could get it, right? But it's not being shown to everyone. And so I think there are some changes that will be coming that way, partially because our government is pushing these big social giants to be accountable for what humans are doing on their platforms, and others because we want more control and uniformity around here. So
You think the change in analytics might be because of CCPA?
Possible.
California privacy law?
Yep, the California Privacy Act might be a reason why some of those analytics are changing, for sure. I was surprised that so much of the analytics on Twitter had gone, because some of it maybe wasn't appropriate to that age range. But again, I don't have full insight into what they took away and what they did with it and why. We will see more. I mean, California has already done a little bit of their own, and I think each state is trying to figure that out, but a lot of them are going to wait for the US government to figure out what to go next. And it took forever for us to come up with changes to things like endorsements. Somebody mentioned earlier, it's really hard to identify paid endorsers. Well, the FTC finally made some regulation around that for social media that says, if you are being paid in any way, product or dollar wise, that needs to be identified in the postings. Well, who's tracking it, right? Now, if I am getting paid for something that I'm endorsing, I will put advertised or sponsored or something in there so people know that. But you don't, if you get caught, you have to pay for the consequence. But a lot of people and a lot of influencers are not sharing that they're getting paid for that or getting compensated. So there's regulation already being added. It's being added late, in my opinion, in some ways, but it's also not being followed because they don't have a clear tool for enforcement. Great questions, you guys. Anything else I can help with? Oh, George, good question. So if you're being paid, that's not private information. You're right, it's not. Most of our information, depending on who we work for anyways, can be public information. If we're a public official, for example, or employed by a government agency, people can find out how much money we make actually. But no, it's not considered private information if we're being paid, because they have said that it's more important to be transparent to the consumers we may be quote unquote misleading by stating that we support a product or a service when we're getting paid to say that. All right. Any other questions? I want to put my contact information back up on the screen. If you guys, if you guys do have any other questions even after the session today, I would love to connect. You can find me on Twitter, on LinkedIn. I am on Facebook, but I don't tend to connect with too many folks on Facebook because it's my friends and family there. But I am happy to connect via email, whatever you'd like. I've also got the NISM information here if you'd like to learn more about them. But I really, truly welcome future conversations. If you have questions, if you have a situation you're not really sure how to handle, I'd be happy to have a conversation about that. My goal is really about helping people navigate this somewhat scary world, right, that we're in, and how it relates to social. I put a lot of information out on social, but I am very careful about what that information is, right? And I am very aware when I have given consent for my information to be public. And I want other people to make those kinds of educated and decisions about what they share as well.
Yeah. Thank you. All right, well, thank you. I think we'll take a short break. And you're welcome to stay on with us for our second speaker, obviously.
Yeah, sorry I finished earlier. I thought there'd be a lot more questions.
Well, there's yeah, I think we asked a lot of them.
Yeah. You guys were great. It was really fun to chat with you all this morning, and I will stay on for a while. So if you do have questions, you can always chat through Messenger or send me a note as well.
I mean, what we found as a chapter, and this is just to tie it back to our personal experiences, the use of social media for us was platform specific. The success of it was, you know, LinkedIn is used by people to establish their professional profile out, and I think not even just so much our age, but the type of persona people want to project and the type of fields we're in have had almost no success going on to the other platforms. Facebook, certainly not Instagram. I mean, there's not much visual. There's not much of a visual aspect to what. I guess you can put up some data models, but I don't know. I don't think that will come over too well on Instagram. Just a bunch of. The one thing I wanted to ask before I forget, if you could make me the host again.
Oh, absolutely. Sorry about that.
Thank you. No, good. Thank you. Just to make sure that I can kick it off to the next speaker.
There you go.
Thank you. But yeah, you know, we've created, and we've tried to, you know, especially in the pandemic, we've tried to use more of that visual marketing and try to get more access to, you know, the meetings that we've been trying to do virtually. So, but it's not this. I mean, it doesn't carry over just quite as well. Like, you know, for some of the other groups, you know, you could live stream a meeting to Facebook and get quite a number of additional viewers. Hasn't really been something that in our case it works. And I think it's just, again, like a different segment. You know, you talk at great length about the you know, audience segmentation and speaking into them in their terms and finding people where they are. I don't think our people are on Facebook, and if they are, not in a way that creates engagement, because we may have accounts, or some of us may have accounts, not all of us, not as much as on LinkedIn, but we may not be connected to each other because we view Facebook as a different kind of platform.
Absolutely.
So, that reduces your engagement because we don't get the notifications that, oh, your friend has RSVP to this event, because we aren't friends in that space.
Yeah.
Well,
Oh, absolutely. And I love that whole example that you're giving, because knowing your audience and where they spend time. When I start to talk to businesses and organizations, and we were talking a little bit prior to the meeting about like nonprofits and how they can better utilize, a lot of times people say, oh, I cannot possibly be everywhere. That's okay. Your business doesn't have to be and shouldn't be. If you take the time to really understand who your audience is and where they are engaging with the type of information that you have to share, then you spend your time doing that really well. And so I can imagine that LinkedIn is a great place for you to connect with other data professionals across the globe. And so that would make a lot of sense. If I were to guess without the data to back me up, I would say either YouTube with like DIY type, here's how you collect data or sort through data or evaluate data or whatever examples would be a possible second, or Twitter actually, because there's so much news and information and resources being shared there. Facebook would be down on the list, and Instagram super far for me. I always give the example of a CPA. Nobody wants to see what a CPA looks at all day long, right? Really? I mean, balance sheets and, things like that. First of all, there's a lot of information they probably can't just take a sheet, that they're looking at of their clients and share. But that's not information that I want to see. I want to see, the sunset or the snow or the cute puppy or whatever. It really drives people. So the fact that you know your audience is huge. Spend time there.
Yeah, we try. And some of our other presentations have touched on more of the privacy and the CCPA regulation in greater detail when we had meetings focused on data security and privacy. And there is, the right to be forgotten and the right to have the information people have about you reported, provided back to you, and compliance around those. Some of us work in helping that compliance take place at our respective companies, and it's it's interesting, and you get and the request comes in, it is to remove your personally identifiable information. In other words, we can continue to store statistical information, like
Right.
the fact that you existed and you were in this zip code, but not enough to figure out who that person is anymore. But a number with some attributes around them.
I have found it really interesting and insightful to go through the different organizations and what I need to do to gather information. So I referenced I'm dealing with my father's estate, and because I had no access to passwords, and because all of what he used to do financially was on either his iPhone or his tablet, that is something that I need in order to properly execute the estate. I had to get a court order to have Apple release anything that's stored on the cloud for me, because anything that would be there would be what they considered his private information, and could be harmful even though he's no longer here. Where once I was given the right to be his personal representative for the estate, I can get his medical records from Mayo Clinic. So I found that, kind of strange. It's like, as a daughter as well, his medical records are more impactful for me and the kids, right? Because there might be hereditary pieces that I should know about, where the information that Apple has would have not necessarily been as personally impactful. It does help me move the estate forward, but I found it interesting that there was such a wall for one, and the other was like, well, once that's done, just send us a copy and we're good. And some places, oh my goodness, I simply called and I said who I was calling for, and they gave me everything I needed, right? And now some of that is super small organizations, we have small town, but it was like, they read it in the newspaper, so they knew it was true. And therefore, here you go. And, I'm married, I have a married name, so I wasn't even using my maiden name, and yet they, yep, sure, you're the right daughter, go for it. So it was kind of interesting
Yeah.
and scary.
Yeah, small town, I guess. Yeah, and a lot of it is it's liability for them, especially for the larger companies. I think that they'll do whatever
Yep.
they can not to hand something over, just in case it comes back to them. But it's yeah, it is interesting. I would look at the Chrome stored password history.
I'm going to do that for sure. So your next speaker comes on in 10 minutes, is that right?
Yeah, 10:45. So I just everybody can take a little bio break. Just we'll come back. We'll come back on at 10:45 and pick it up. Yeah.
Sounds good.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks everybody for staying on.